Little boy shared his lunch with hungry bikers. 100 riders showed up at his door. 2 days later, the road into Clover Ridge, Georgia had seen better days. Cracked asphalt, patchy shoulders, the kind of two-lane stretch that GPS systems occasionally forgot existed and trucks avoided on principle. It ran through the kind of small town that most people drove through without stopping. A gas station, a diner, a post office, a dollar store, and about 400 people who had made their peace with the fact that the world was mostly happening somewhere else. It was on that road, on a Tuesday afternoon in October, with the Georgia sky doing that particular thing it does in fall where it turns a shade of blue so clean it almost hurts to look at, that everything began. 14 motorcycles came around the bend, then stopped. All of them. Right there on the shoulder of Route 9. Engines cutting out one by one, the rumble fading into the particular quiet of a Georgia afternoon that has nothing to fill it but birdsong and wind. Stranded, fuel, or the lack of it. The nearest gas station was 6 miles back and not a single one of them had enough in the tank to make it. They were big men, leather jackets, road dust, the kind of appearance that made people on sidewalks find reasons to look elsewhere. And standing on the other side of the road, backpack over one shoulder, brown paper lunch bag in his hand, school just let out 30 minutes ago, was Jamal. 15 years old, 5'7", the kind of skinny that comes from a household where seconds aren't always available. He looked at the bikers looked at him. And then Jamal did something that nobody, not the bikers, not the town, not even his mother when she heard about it later, could quite believe. He crossed the road, and he opened his lunch bag. Stay with me, because what this 15-year-old boy does next with nothing but a brown paper bag is going to restore everything you thought you'd lost faith in. If you're new here, subscribe right now, because this story is only getting started, and where it ends will leave you speechless. To understand what happened on Route 9 that Tuesday afternoon, you need to understand 2 things. Who Jamal was, and who Gloria was. Because this story did not begin on a cracked Georgia highway with 14 motorcycles and an empty fuel tank. It began years before that, in a small house on DeKalb Street in Clover Ridge, Georgia, where a woman was doing the impossible thing that millions of women do every single day, without acknowledgement, without applause, and without the option of stopping. Clover Ridge was the kind of town that took a long time to leave and an even longer time to forget. It sat in the western corner of Carroll County, small enough that everybody knew everybody's business, far enough from Atlanta that the city felt like a different country entirely. The main street had a barber shop, a church, a hardware store, and a beauty salon that doubled as the town's primary news source. The elementary school and the middle school shared a parking lot. The high school, 3 miles out on the edge of town, had a football team that the whole county showed up for on Friday nights, regardless of the season's record. It was not a wealthy town. It had never been a wealthy town. But it had the particular dignity of places that have learned to build community out of the materials available, which were, more often than not, each other. Gloria Washington was 38 years old and had been living in Clover Ridge her entire life. She had grown up 3 streets over from where she lived now, same town, different house, same sky. Her mother had been a seamstress. Her father had worked at the lumberyard outside of town until his knees gave out, and then he had worked at the hardware store until that gave out too. They were good people. Hardworking, quiet, the kind of people who paid their debts on time and helped their neighbors without being asked and never once expected the world to make things easy for them. Gloria had inherited all of that. She had married at 22, young, hopeful, the way people are when they are young enough that hope still feels like a plan. Her husband Terrence had been a good man in the way that some men are good men. Genuinely, warmly, without effort. But he had also been a restless man, and restlessness, in Gloria's experience, was the thing that good intentions could not always contain. He had left when Jamal was 4. Not with cruelty, not with anger, just gone. A note on the kitchen table, a bag missing from the closet, and a silence that had settled into the house so completely that after a while Gloria had stopped noticing it and started calling it peace. She had been raising Jamal alone ever since. 11 years of alone. She worked 2 jobs. Mornings, 5 days a week, 6 to noon. She cleaned rooms at the Days Inn off the highway interchange, 12 miles from Clover Ridge. She drove there in a 2009 Honda Civic that needed a new alternator and had a heater that worked intermittently and a check engine light that had been on for so long she had started thinking of it as a feature rather than a warning. Afternoons, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, she worked the register at Crawford's, the grocery store on Main Street, from 1 o'clock to 6. The owner, Mr. Crawford, was a fair man who paid on time and never commented on the fact that Gloria occasionally bought the marked-down bread at the end of her shift because it was all the budget allowed. Between the 2 jobs, she made enough. Just enough. The particular mathematical tightness of a life where every dollar had a destination before it was earned. Rent, utilities, groceries, Jamal's school supplies, the alternator fund that grew by $7 or $8 a month when the month was good and didn't grow at all when it wasn't. There was no cushion, no margin, no category in Gloria's budget labeled unexpected. She had learned over 11 years to simply keep unexpected things from happening. It was exhausting work, the constant vigilance of a life lived without a safety net. But Gloria Washington did not spend much time thinking about that. She spent her time doing what needed doing, waking up before the alarm, driving the 12 miles in the dark, making the beds that other people slept in, coming home, checking Jamal's homework, making dinner out of whatever the week's budget had left room for, sleeping, starting again. She was the strongest person Jamal had ever known. He told her that once, on a Sunday morning when he was 13, sitting at the kitchen table watching her iron his school shirt for the week ahead. And she had looked at him with those eyes of hers, warm and direct and containing always something that was looking slightly further ahead than the present moment. "I'm not strong, baby," she had said. "I'm just consistent." He had written that down in the back of his notebook. He still had the notebook. Jamal Washington was 15 years old and in the 10th grade at Clover Ridge High School. He was lean and tall for his age, the kind of tall that had arrived suddenly the summer before 9th grade and left him slightly uncertain about his own limbs, like a person still learning the dimensions of a new coat. He had his mother's eyes, that same warm directness, that same quality of seeing things slightly more completely than the situation required. He had his father's height and nothing else of him, which suited Jamal fine. He had stopped needing anything from Terrence Washington around the same time he started being taller than most of his teachers. He was a good student, not the top of his class, but attentive, the kind of student that teachers remembered not because of grades, but because of the quality of his attention. He listened. He asked questions that showed he had been thinking about the answer before he raised his hand. He was the kind of 15-year-old that made adults feel, against all the evidence of the news cycle, cautiously optimistic about the future. He had 3 close friends. He played pickup basketball on weekends at the court behind the rec center. He liked history, particularly the parts that his textbooks moved through too quickly, the parts that felt unfinished. He had been reading on his own since he was 6 and had never really stopped. And every day, 5 days a week without exception, Gloria packed him a lunch. It was not an elaborate lunch. A sandwich, turkey when the budget allowed, peanut butter and honey when it didn't, a piece of fruit, sometimes chips, sometimes not, a bottle of water, wrapped carefully in a brown paper bag that she folded at the top the same way every time, the way her own mother had folded it for her, which was a small thing that meant more than it had any right to. Jamal knew what the lunch cost. He knew what everything cost, in the way that children raised in careful households always know, not from being told, but from watching. From the way his mother paused, briefly, in the grocery store before putting something in the cart. From the way the heat in the house dropped 2 degrees in November when the bill came due. From the folded brown bag and what it represented, not just food, but the daily, deliberate love of a woman who made sure he had what he needed, even when the margin between having and not having was razor thin. He was grateful for it every single day. Which was why, On that Tuesday afternoon in October, standing on the shoulder of Route 9 with his lunch bag in his hand and 14 stranded bikers looking at him from across the road, Jamal didn't hesitate. Not for 1 second. He crossed the road. The closest biker, a large man, 6'2", silver beard, leather vest with road patches up both sides, watched him come with the careful, neutral expression of a man who had learned not to make assumptions about what the world was about to hand him. "You need something, kid," the man said. Jamal looked at the motorcycles, at the men, at the empty road stretching 6 miles back to the nearest gas station. "Looks like you're the ones that need something," Jamal said. The man looked at him for a moment. Then, despite everything, despite the road dust and the empty tanks and the afternoon that had not gone remotely according to plan, he smiled. "Ray," he said, extending a hand. "That's my name." "Jamal," the boy said, and shook it. Ray had been riding for 31 years. He had ridden through 11 states, 4 weather systems that had no business being survived, and one particularly memorable stretch of Nevada highway at 2 in the morning that he still thought about sometimes when he needed to remember what it felt like to be completely, perfectly alive. He had seen a lot of things on the road. He had never seen a 15-year-old boy cross a highway with a brown paper lunch bag to help a group of stranded bikers he had never met in his life. "You got a phone, kid?" Ray asked. "We need to call someone for fuel." "Nearest station is 6 miles back," Jamal said. "Carroll's. Mr. Carroll doesn't deliver, though." Ray looked at him. "You know every gas station in the county?" "Only the ones on Route 9, Jamal said. "My mom drives this road every morning. I ride with her sometimes when she has the early shift." Ray nodded slowly, looked back at his group. 13 other riders spread along the shoulder, some sitting on their bikes, some standing, all of them carrying the particular energy of people who have accepted that the afternoon has gotten away from them and are waiting to find out what comes next. "We called a fuel truck," Ray said. 45 minutes, they said, maybe an hour." Jamal looked at the men, then down at the brown paper bag in his hand. He thought about his mother, up at 5, 12 miles in the dark, beds she didn't sleep in, a check engine light she had learned to live with. He thought about the sandwich in the bag. Turkey today. One of the good days. He opened the bag. "I've only got one sandwich," he said, "and an apple and some chips." He looked at 14 men. "It's not enough," he said, "but it's what I have." Ray stared at him. For a long moment, a moment that would stay with Ray for the rest of his life, that he would recount at rallies and rest stops and around campfires in 3 different states over the years that followed. He simply stared at this boy. This thin, serious, generous boy, standing on the shoulder of a Georgia highway, offering everything he had to 14 strangers because they looked like they needed it. "Kid," Ray said, and then stopped, because there was nothing adequate to say. "It's okay?" Jamal said, misreading the silence. "I can eat when I get home." The man to Ray's left, Bobby, 44 years old, quieter than the rest, a mechanic from Cartersville who had been riding with Ray's group for 6 years, leaned over and said something low that only Ray could hear. Ray nodded. "We can't take your lunch, son," Ray said. "You're not taking it," Jamal said. "I'm giving it." He held out the bag. Ray looked at it, then at Jamal. Then, slowly, with the careful respect of a man accepting something that he understood was worth considerably more than its components, he took it. "Thank you," Ray said. Quietly. The way people say thank you when they mean something larger than the word. "It's just a sandwich," Jamal said. "No," Ray said, "it isn't." They divided it. 14 men and 1 sandwich and 1 apple and 1 small bag of chips, divided with the particular, unspoken mathematics of people who understood that the gesture mattered more than the portions. Ray took the first half of the sandwich and passed the rest down the line. Bobby quartered the apple with a pocket knife, careful and precise. The chips were passed hand to hand until the bag was empty. Nobody got much. Everyone got something. And something, on a Georgia roadside in October with an hour to wait and nowhere to be, turned out to be exactly enough. Jamal sat on the guardrail while they waited. He had homework in his backpack, an essay on the Reconstruction era that was due Thursday, but he didn't reach for it. Instead, he talked with Ray, and then with Bobby, and then, gradually, with the others. A man named Curtis, who restored vintage bikes in his garage in Marietta. A man named Pete, who had a daughter Jamal's age and kept pulling out his phone to show pictures of her soccer games. A quiet giant named Thomas, who barely said 10 words the entire time but listened to everything with the focused attention of someone for whom listening was a form of participation. They asked him about school, about Clover Ridge, about what he wanted to do with his life. "I want to study architecture," Jamal said. "Design buildings, not just how they look, how they work, how they make people feel inside them." Ray looked at him with the expression of a man revising his understanding of something. "You thought about that for a while," Ray said. "It wasn't a question. Since I was 9, Jamal said. "I drew my first building plan when I was 9. My mom still has it on the refrigerator." Bobby laughed. Warm, genuine. "Your mom sounds like good people. She's the best person I know," Jamal said. Simply, without performance. The way people state facts they have never once had reason to question. The group went quiet for a moment, the particular, reflective quiet of men who were, each in their own way, thinking about their own mothers, their own kitchens, their own refrigerators with their own drawings on them from 30 years ago. The fuel truck arrived 53 minutes later. A man in a Carol's Gas uniform climbed out, assessed the situation with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this run many times, and began filling tanks down the line. Ray pulled out his wallet to pay. While the transaction was happening, Bobby drifted over to where Jamal was still sitting on the guardrail, backpack between his feet, watching the process with the quiet interest of someone who found the mechanics of things genuinely fascinating. "You live far from here?" Bobby asked. "About a mile and a half," Jamal said. "DeKalb Street." "You walk that every day?" "Every day," Jamal said. "It's fine. I like the walk." Bobby looked at the road, at the boy, at the backpack that had seen better days, one strap held by a safety pin, the bottom scuffed from the pavement. He said nothing, but he noticed. The way certain people notice things, not casually, not and then forget, but with the specific, deliberate attention of someone filing information away for a purpose they haven't fully articulated yet. When the tanks were full, Ray gathered the group. Engines started, the rumble building down the line, that particular sound that Jamal had always heard from a distance and found, up close, considerably more magnificent than he had expected. Ray walked back to where Jamal stood. He reached out his hand. Jamal shook it. "You didn't have to do what you did," Ray said. "I know," Jamal said. "Why did you?" Jamal thought about it for a moment, looked at the road, at the October sky that was doing its beautiful blue thing above the tree line. "My mom always says, you give what you can, when you can," he said, "because you never know when you're going to be the one who needs it." Ray held his hand a beat longer than a handshake required. "Your mom is a wise woman, Jamal." "Yes, sir," Jamal said. "She really is." Ray released his hand, walked back to his bike, swung a leg over, and then, before he put on his helmet, he looked back one more time at the boy standing on the shoulder of Route 9 with no lunch and a safety-pinned backpack, and the kind of character that most people spent their whole lives trying to build. He put the helmet on. The group pulled out. 14 motorcycles rolling back onto Route 9, heading north. The sound fading gradually into the Georgia afternoon until there was nothing left of them but road dust and the memory of an hour that had not gone according to plan and had been, because of that, considerably better than anything that had. Jamal watched them until he couldn't see them anymore. Then he picked up his backpack and walked the mile and a half home, hungry, and somehow, in a way he couldn't entirely explain and didn't particularly need to, completely full. That night, Ray sat in a motel room in Cartersville and opened his phone. He typed a message to the group chat, all 14 of them, plus the wider network beyond. It was 3 sentences long. He sent it, and then he put the phone down and looked at the ceiling and thought about a boy on a Georgia highway who had given everything he had to strangers without a single moment of hesitation. His phone began to buzz. First one reply, then 5, then 20. Then it didn't stop. The message Ray sent that night was simple. No flourish, no drama, just the facts, the way Ray had always communicated. Direct, plain, the language of a man who had learned long ago that the truth didn't need decoration to land. Met a kid today on Route 9 outside Clover Ridge, Georgia. 15 years old. We were stranded. He crossed the road and gave us his lunch. Everything he had. Single mom, works 2 jobs, kid walks a mile and a half to school with a busted backpack. His name is Jamal. I think we should go back. 3 sentences. That was all. By midnight, 47 people had responded. By 2 in the morning, the number was 93. By the time Ray woke up at 6:15 and reached for his phone with the bleary automatic gesture of a man who had been waking up to a phone for 20 years, the group chat had 112 responses and 3 separate side conversations running simultaneously, all of them variations of the same thing. When are we going? I'm in. Tell me where. Bobby called at 7. Ray? I see it, Ray said. He was sitting on the edge of the motel bed in his socks, scrolling through the responses with the careful attention of a man who was trying to stay calm about something that was moving faster than calm could contain. How many you count? Bobby asked. Right now, 108 confirmed. More coming in. A pause on the line. Ray, Bobby said. We need to do this right. I know. Not just show up, 100 bikers showing up at a woman's door unannounced. I know, Bobby. Single mother, kids, small town. Bobby. What? I know, Ray said. That's why I'm sitting here at 6 in the morning figuring out how to do it right instead of just doing it. A long pause. Okay, Bobby said. Good. So what are we thinking? Ray looked at his phone. At the 108 names of people who had, in the space of one night, decided that a boy on a Georgia highway deserved to know that the world had seen him. We're thinking big, Ray said quietly. But we're thinking careful. What followed over the next 48 hours was the kind of organizing that happens when a large group of people with strong opinions and genuine intentions are all pointed in the same direction at the same time. Ray made calls, Bobby made calls. Curtis, the vintage bike restorer from Marietta, turned out to have a brother-in-law who ran a landscaping company and another connection who managed a hardware supply warehouse outside of Atlanta. Pete, the one with the daughter who played soccer, knew a woman who ran a non-profit that helped single-parent households with emergency home repairs. Thomas, the quiet giant who had said 10 words on the roadside and meant every one of them, drove back to Clover Ridge alone on the morning after Ray's message. Not to the house on DeKalb Street, to the town itself. He sat in Crawford's grocery store for 45 minutes buying coffee he didn't need and listening to the particular frequency of a small town that knows everything about everyone. He learned that Gloria Washington was well liked, that she never asked for help, that the roof of her house on DeKalb Street had been a concern since the spring when the storms came through and took a section of guttering with them, that Jamal was, by every account in that store, the kind of kid that made people glad there were still kids. Thomas drove back to Cartersville. Called Ray. The roof, he said, and the car. Those are the 2 things. How bad? Bad enough that she's been putting money aside for 14 months and still isn't close. Ray was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. Add it to the list. Gloria Washington heard the motorcycles before she saw them. It was a Thursday morning. 2 days after Jamal had come home without his lunch and told her, over a dinner of rice and beans, about the stranded bikers on Route 9, with the careful, understated way he told stories, like he was giving her the facts and letting her feel them at her own pace. She had listened, had looked at her son across the kitchen table, had felt something move in her chest that she recognized as pride so complete it had no room for anything else. You gave them your whole lunch? She said. It seemed like the right thing, Jamal said. You weren't hungry? A pause. I was fine, Mom. She had looked at him for a long moment, then reached across the table and put her hand over his. She hadn't said anything else. She hadn't needed to. Now it was Thursday morning. 6:52. She was due at the Days Inn at 7:15, coat on, keys in hand, checking engine light, waiting faithfully on the dashboard of the Civic in the driveway. She heard it first as a low rumble. Distant. The kind of sound that Route 9 produced sometimes when a convoy of trucks came through. A vibration more than a noise, something you felt before you heard it. Then it got louder. She stepped onto the porch, and she saw them. Coming down DeKalb Street, slowly deliberately, with the careful, almost ceremonial pace of people who had talked about this moment and decided that it deserved to be done right. 101 motorcycles, rolling 2 by 2, filling the street from one end to the other. Gloria stood on the porch with her keys in her hand and watched them come and felt something happen in her chest that she did not immediately have a name for. Something that was not quite fear, not quite surprise, not quite any of the individual things she knew how to label, but something underneath all of them, something older. The feeling of being seen. Jamal heard it from his bedroom. He had been awake since 6. It was a school day. He was always awake by 6. Lying on his bed reading the reconstruction chapter he had finished the essay on, and then kept reading because he couldn't stop. He heard the rumble, looked at the ceiling, frowned, went to the window, and saw the street full of motorcycles. He was on the porch in 12 seconds. Ray pulled up first. He cut his engine at the edge of the driveway, swung off his bike, walked up the path to the porch where Gloria stood with her keys and her coat and an expression that was trying to process something far larger than expressions are usually built for. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, took off his helmet, looked at Gloria, then at Jamal, standing beside her. "Mrs. Washington," he said, "my name is Ray Covington. 2 days ago your son gave 14 hungry strangers everything he had on the side of a highway. We thought it was time somebody returned the favor." Gloria looked at him, then at the street full of motorcycles, engines now cutting one by one, the rumble fading in stages, 100 men climbing off their bikes and standing in the quiet Georgia morning with the patient, purposeful energy of people who had somewhere to be and had chosen deliberately to be here. Her hand tightened around her keys. "Mr. Covington," she said, and her voice was steady because Gloria Washington's voice was always steady. It was one of the things about her that had never changed through any of it. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, ma'am," Ray said. "We just need to know one thing." He looked at her steadily. "Will you let us help?" Gloria looked at Jamal. Jamal looked at his mother. And in the particular, wordless language of two people who had been each other's entire world for 11 years, who had shared every difficult morning and every tight budget and every dinner where the portions were careful and the love was not. Something passed between them. Gloria turned back to Ray. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, longer than 11 years of consistency and early mornings and check engine lights and folded brown paper bags, Gloria Washington's eyes filled. She did not let them fall, but they filled. "Yes," she said quietly. "Okay, yes." Ray turned to the street, nodded once, and 100 men, leather jackets, road dust, the particular quiet purpose of people who had driven through the Georgia morning for something that mattered, began to move. They worked like they had been planning it for months. Because they had, or the closest thing to months that 48 hours of phone calls and group chats and favors called in across 3 counties could produce. What looked from the outside like a spontaneous outpouring was, underneath, something considerably more organized. Ray had learned in 31 years of riding with groups of people who argued about everything and agreed on almost nothing, that the only way to get 100 people moving in the same direction was to be very clear, very early about what the direction was. The direction this morning was the house on DeKalb Street, and everything it needed, they divided without being told. It was the thing that struck Jamal most, watching from the porch, the way they organized themselves. No confusion, no overlap, no wasted motion. Like a machine that had been assembled in the night and was now running exactly as designed. 12 men went to the roof. Curtis had brought materials from his brother-in-law's warehouse, shingles, flashing, guttering, sealant, loaded in a flatbed truck that had followed the convoy down Route 9 and now sat in the driveway with its tailgate down. Within 20 minutes of arrival, the sound of work was coming from above. Measured, purposeful, the sound of things being fixed. 8 men went to the yard. The yard on DeKalb Street had been, for the past 2 years, a source of quiet guilt for Gloria. The kind of thing that went on the list and stayed there because the list had a hierarchy, and the yard was always below rent and utilities and Jamal's school supplies. Within an hour it looked like a different property. Grass cut, edges trimmed. The broken fence on the left side, down since a storm 18 months ago, rebuilt from materials Bobby had loaded into his truck that morning before leaving Cartersville. 4 men were under the Civic. Gloria had not asked about the car, had not mentioned the alternator, the check engine light, the heater that worked on its own schedule. Thomas, who had come back to Clover Ridge 2 days ago and listened to a grocery store, had simply walked to the driveway, crouched beside the car, looked underneath it, stood up, and made 3 phone calls. By 9:15, 2 of the men under the Civic were certified mechanics. By 11, the alternator was replaced. By noon, the check engine light was off for the first time in 14 months. Gloria stood on the porch and watched all of it with the particular stillness of a woman whose entire system for processing the world had been built around managing alone, and who was now, for the first time in a very long time, not managing alone and did not quite know what to do with her hands. Ray stood beside her. He had positioned himself there not intrusively, but with the quiet, deliberate presence of someone who understood that this moment required witnessing. That Gloria Washington should not watch this by herself. "I don't understand," she said at one point, quietly. Not to Ray specifically, just to the morning, to the men working on her roof, to the sound of her fence being rebuilt. "Why would you do all of this? You don't know us." Ray was quiet for a moment. "We know Jamal," he said, "and Jamal told us everything we needed to know about you." Gloria looked at him. "He didn't say much about me," she said. "He said I was consistent." "Yes, ma'am," Ray said. "He did. A beat. Do you know how many people," Ray continued, "spend their entire lives looking for one person they can describe with that word and mean it as a compliment?" Gloria looked back at the yard, at the men working, at the Georgia morning going about its clean, unhurried business above all of it. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Pete found Jamal at the side of the house at 10 o'clock. The boy was watching Curtis's team on the roof with the focused, architectural interest of someone studying a process he genuinely wanted to understand. Head tilted slightly, tracking the sequence of actions, the logic of how one thing led to the next. "You're watching how they do it," Pete said. "Not a question. The flashing," Jamal said. "The way they overlap it. I've been reading about roof drainage systems, but I've never actually seen." He stopped, looked at Pete. "Sorry, I do that." "Do what?" "Get interested in how things work when there's probably something more important to pay attention to." Pete looked at the boy for a moment. "Kid," he said, "the way things work is the important thing. Don't ever apologize for that." Jamal looked at him, then back at the roof. "You really want to study architecture?" Pete said. "More than anything, tech," Jamal said. "You told Ray that on the roadside." "Yes, sir." Pete nodded slowly, reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, produced a card, held it out to Jamal. "My brother-in-law runs an architectural firm in Atlanta," he said. "Has for 20 years. He called me this morning when he heard about you. He wants to offer you a summer internship, paid, starting next June." Jamal looked at the card, then at Pete. "I'm 15, he said. "He knows," Pete said. "He started drawing building plans when he was 9 too." Jamal took the card, held it in both hands, and for the first time all morning, for the first time since he had stood at his window at 6:52 and watched a street fill with motorcycles, something cracked open in his expression. Not dramatically, just the particular private expression of a person receiving something they had wanted for so long that they had stopped letting themselves want it out loud. He closed his hand around the card. "Thank you," he said. The way Ray had said thank you on the roadside 2 days ago, not for the object, but for everything the object represented. Pete nodded. "Thank your mother," he said. "She raised someone worth knowing, Jamal." That's where it started. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the roof was done. By 3, the yard was finished, cleaner and more ordered than it had been since Gloria moved in. By 3:30, the Civic sat in the driveway with a new alternator, new brake pads, a full tank of gas, and a check engine light that had finally, permanently gone dark. At 4 o'clock, Ray called everyone together. They gathered in the front yard. 101 men in leather jackets standing in the Georgia afternoon sun on a street in Clover Ridge that had never seen anything quite like this, and would be talking about it for years. Gloria and Jamal stood on the porch looking out at them. Ray stood at the foot of the porch steps. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, produced an envelope. "This," he said, "is from everyone here, and from people who couldn't be here today but wanted to be part of this." He looked at Gloria. "It's for Jamal's education, whatever form that takes. College, architecture school, whatever he decides he needs." He walked up the steps, held out the envelope. Gloria looked at it. Her jaw tightened. The particular tightening of a woman who has been strong for so long that receiving feels like a different language. One she has to consciously translate. She took it, opened it, looked at what was inside. The number on the check was not enormous by the standards of the world that Ray moved through in his professional life, but it was, by the standards of a household in Clover Ridge, Georgia, where every dollar had a destination before it was earned. Life-changing. Gloria closed the envelope, pressed it against her chest. And this time, for the first time, in front of 100 strangers on her own front porch in the October afternoon, she let the tears fall. Not with sound, not with collapse, just quietly, completely. The way a person cries when they have been holding something for so long that the act of setting it down is itself overwhelming. Jamal put his arm around her. He was 15 years old and already taller than her by 2 inches, and he put his arm around his mother the way she had put her arms around him 1,000 times, without thinking, without calculation, simply because it was what the moment required. The yard was completely silent. 100 men in leather jackets standing in the Georgia afternoon with their helmets in their hands and not one of them making a sound. Ray looked at Jamal. "You told us your mom always says, 'Give what you can, when you can, because you never know when you're going to be the one who needs it.'" Jamal nodded. "She was right," Ray said, "about all of it." He looked at Gloria. "Ma'am, you raised a son who crossed a highway with his lunch to help strangers. Whatever you think you haven't given him, I want you to know that what you have given him is the most important thing a person can have." He paused. "Character," he said. "You gave him character. And character, real character, changes rooms, changes roads, changes everything it touches." Gloria tightened her arm around Jamal, said nothing. Because some things don't have a response, they just have to be felt. The motorcycles left DeKalb Street at 4:45. One by one, engines starting down the line, that magnificent rumble building and building until the whole street vibrated with it, they pulled out. Heading back to Cartersville, to Marietta, to Atlanta, to the various corners of Georgia and beyond, that 100 people call home when they're not on the road. Ray went last. He sat on his bike at the end of the driveway for a moment, helmet on, engine running, and looked back at the porch where Gloria and Jamal stood watching. He raised one hand. Jamal raised his. Ray pulled out onto DeKalb Street and rode north toward Route 9, and the sound of his engine faded the way it had faded 2 days ago, gradually, completely, until there was nothing left of it but the Georgia afternoon and the smell of cut grass and the particular quality of a silence that follows something meaningful. Gloria and Jamal stood on the porch for a long time after the last engine sound disappeared. The yard was immaculate. The roof was solid. The car in the driveway had a full tank and a quiet dashboard, and in Gloria's hand was an envelope that meant her son's future had just gotten considerably more possible than it had been this morning. She looked at Jamal. "You gave them your lunch," she said. "Just a sandwich," he said. "Jamal? Mom?" She looked at him, really looked at him, the way mothers look at their children when they suddenly see, with complete clarity, exactly who that child has become, without them noticing the precise moment it happened. "I am so proud of you," she said. "Not because of this." She gestured at the yard, the roof, the car. "Before all of this, I have always been so proud of you." Jamal looked at his mother, at the woman who had woken up before the alarm for 11 years, who had driven 12 miles in the dark to make beds she didn't sleep in, who had packed a brown paper bag every single morning with turkey when the budget allowed and peanut butter and honey when it didn't, and folded the top the same way every time, because that was how her own mother had folded it. And some things you pass on not because you think about them, but because love has its own muscle memory. "I know, Mom," he said quietly. "I've always known." She pulled him into her, this tall, serious, generous boy who was somehow still her boy, and held on. 6 months later, Jamal Washington took the train to Atlanta for the first day of his summer internship at Meridian Architecture Group. He wore the new backpack that Bobby had left on the porch that Thursday. Sturdy, well-made, both straps intact. He had his sketchbook, 3 pencils. The card Pete had given him, kept not in his wallet, but in the front pocket of the sketchbook where he could see it. He sat by the window on the train and watched Georgia go past. The fields, the tree lines, the small towns that looked from a distance exactly like Clover Ridge, each of them containing, he now knew with absolute certainty, people worth knowing. He opened his sketchbook and began to draw. Ray called on the morning of the internship. Jamal answered on the second ring. "First day," Ray said. "First day," Jamal confirmed. "How you feeling?" Jamal looked out the train window at the Georgia morning doing its beautiful thing with the light. "Ready?" he said. Ray laughed, warm, full, the laugh of a man who believed the answer completely. "Good," he said. "Call me when you're done. I want to hear everything." "Yes, sir," Jamal said. He hung up, looked back out the window, and thought about a Tuesday afternoon in October, about 14 stranded motorcycles, about a brown paper bag and a turkey sandwich, and an apple and a small bag of chips divided 14 ways on the shoulder of Route 9, about what his mother always said. Give what you can, when you can, because you never know when you're going to be the one who needs it. He pressed his hand flat against the sketchbook page and smiled. A 15-year-old boy gave everything he had to strangers on a highway, and the world gave it back 100 times over. If this story touched something in you, if you believe that kindness is never wasted, that character is the most valuable thing a person can own, that one brown paper bag on a Georgia roadside can change 2 lives forever. Share this video right now. Leave a comment and tell me, would you have crossed that road? And if you're not subscribed yet, do it now. Because every week we tell the stories that remind us what people are capable of when they choose to be their best. Don't miss what's coming next. Because that is what kindness does. It does not ask for an audience. It does not calculate the return. It does not check the budget or measure the portions or wonder whether the people on the receiving end deserve it. It simply moves. Across a highway, with a brown paper bag and everything it has. Jamal Washington already knew that. He learned it from his mother, at a kitchen table, in a small town in Georgia, where the sky in October turns a shade of blue so clean it almost hurts to look at. And where, on one particular Tuesday afternoon, a boy crossed a road and changed everything.